All right, so the main topic that we want to get into, the one that
we'll get back to the Super Bowl in a little bit.
Right, that's just entirely fascinating to me. So we had the NBA trade deadline, and we had some blockbusters, some stuff that we were not prepared for. I thought, honestly, beginning of the week, I thought, it's not going to be that big a deal. They did.
I thought it was hilarious because, like, the day before the trade deadline, Woj was saying he wasn't hearing anything about the Sixers and the Nets talking. And Brian Windhorst was saying, oh, yeah, they're talking. They've been talking. And I was like, well, what's, so I was like, I don't think anything's going to happen because I just didn't, like, why would you, trade for Ben Simmons? But,
Yeah, it never made any sense. So I just want to get some stuff out of the way first. Before we take a gigantic dump on it, which is what's going to happen here. I just want to say that, as far as both teams got value here, okay? It would be like if you were having a garage sale.
The Nets Sixers trade?
Yes, the Nets Sixers trade, excuse me. The Harden Simmons trade. Both teams, Brooklyn and Philadelphia, they got good value because they were things they were going to lose anyway. So it's like you did about as if when you're in the situation, right, where you've just got to get rid of something, it's like if you had a garage sale and somebody brings you something that is valuable to you, it's not valuable to,
well, yeah, I honestly, that's good that you started with that because I wanted to make sure we made that point because yes, I can see benefits for both teams in this trade and I understand why they did it. Okay. Right. We'll get into later on, like, the reaction people are having to it and why I think we kind of agree that some of it's a little bit, what are you guys talking about? But yeah.
Right. Yeah. So look, I mean, let's just start with Brooklyn, right? James Harden doesn't want to be there, and you're faced with the prospect
for nothing. So get something for
right. Him. You're facing the prospect of having to pay him a contract extension or he's just going to walk. And so, you're like, okay, let's try to get something for him. And from Philly's perspective, Ben Simmons, in my opinion, you couldn't bring Ben Simmons back to Philadelphia. You just couldn't. After all that's gone on there, it would be a disaster to try to play him. Now, if they were in a different market like New Orleans or Charlotte or Oklahoma City, it would be fine. You could probably play him. But in Philadelphia, it's just people have made up their minds that this is one of these times where the fans actually do make a big difference and have a say because you can't go back to it. So for them to be able, this is the best possible trade that anybody could have imagined for Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
To get a guy who has won the MVP before, is a perennial all-star, So yeah, I just wanted to start with that. Like in terms of just value, yeah, they did just fine. Now, when we start talking about basketball, and so this is
predicting who we think is a favorite or who's not and who's still in the title contention, that's where things get murky. That's where I've heard a lot of stuff this week where I'm like, what the hell are you guys talking about?
Right. When we talk about basketball fit or, athletes and all that stuff. And listen, this is the prism that I look at this through, okay? What's going to happen in a playoff series?
Yes.
This is how this needs to be looked at. Okay, we can't just get into, we'll do this in the regular season and their rotation will be this. All that stuff's irrelevant. Okay, Brooklyn and Philadelphia are not in this to get a good record and maybe make the playoffs. Yeah. These teams are trying to win the championship. So when I look at your team and look at the moves you make, I'm going to look at it in a 7-game series in the playoffs. What are you going to do?
The other team gets to focus on your team and only your team and start figuring out your weaknesses and attacking your weaknesses and making the game tougher on you. Because that's what happens in the playoffs. You can't just be getting transition baskets and, that doesn't happen. It becomes more of a half-court game where you need to be able to get stops. You need to be able to get buckets against tough defense. So, yeah, it's a totally different game.
Yeah, so, I thought this was a terrible idea from the beginning because I don't see – I think there are the negatives I think there just are huge negatives. And I think the way that these teams are constructed, these are problems that are going to be really difficult to solve. So
with Brooklyn especially, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're like, well, Simmons is such a good defender. He is a good defender. That's there's proof of that. And in terms of him being in transition and the fact that he's 6'10" and he can, attack the basket, okay, yeah, that's fair. But in a play, but then it becomes, well, who are your five guys, on the floor in crunch time? Keeping in mind that New York City still has the vaccine mandate, and Kyrie Irving cannot play in the home games. Okay, he can only play in the road games. So, at most you're playing, he's playing 3 or 4 games out of a 7-game series. Okay, so it's like, okay, fine. Well, we'll have Durant and Kyrie on the floor at the same time. Okay, that makes sense. What are you going to do on defense? We'll have Simmons on defense. Okay, but he's an offensive liability because he doesn't shoot. And then you're going to put Seth Curry and Patty. Okay, so now you don't have very much size, and you have defensive liabilities all over the court, including Kyrie Irving, Seth Curry, and Patty Mills. He's a smaller player, so it's just, So it's like people are like, oh yeah, well he can do this, and I'm like, well, what about that? What about in crunch time? Ben Simmons couldn't play in crunch time in the playoffs last year. Doc Rivers wouldn't put him out there because he's such an offensive liability, and he's clogging up the floor. He's screwing up all the spacing.
Yeah, so yeah, let's go over the Brooklyn perspective on this first, because this I think is the worst. If we're going to declare a winner and a loser, to me the Brooklyn got they got the worst end of this deal, whatever that end is. Right. Yeah, I agree with you. This is let's just start with Ben Simmons. He hasn't played the whole season.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be ready to play right away anyway, not to mention the fact that Durant is still out and Kyrie can't play home games. And they've lost 10 games in a row, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So in the short term, yeah, this is a bit of a problem. But, yeah, I don't, I understand, okay, they got Simmons for Harden, blah, blah, blah. But this team, to me, this team doesn't fit together. They just don't. They got Seth Curry in the deal, which is a nice pickup, but Seth Curry and Kyrie Irving don't play defense.
Yeah.
They can't guard anybody. Okay? Yeah. And then you're putting out, the big guys that they have are, they got LaMarcus Aldridge, who's getting close to my age.
Yeah.
And then you've got, they still have Blake Griffin, right? And you've got, and then you've got Nick Claxton, and, you've got a bunch of just kind of stuff on this team. And they're like, oh, sit. And so I don't understand. I'm completely lost at the people saying, well, this is a good fit for Simmons, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, why is it a good fit for him? Because anytime he's been depended on to do stuff, like when the whole time in Philadelphia, when you depend on him to have to get stuff done, what happens is what happens in the playoffs the last few years.
Yeah.
Ben Simmons hasn't gotten any better since 2018. He's the same guy.
Yep.
So there no team's going to guard him when you're on offense, you're playing 4-on-5 because nobody's going to guard him. Right. So it's like, oh, he's a great distributor. It's like, okay, well, that's great when you can run fast breaks and he gets to grab the ball out of the basket and run downhill.
Then I hear people saying, well, why doesn't he play like Giannis? Okay. Hang on a second here. Okay. Giannis is a tremendous, he's not a great shooter, but he is a tremendous offensive player. Okay. And the way that, and also Giannis is just, I don't know Ben Simmons, so I don't want to get into, but Giannis is a very, very ultra competitive athlete who basically just goes out there every game and works his ass off to try to win the game. Whatever he's got to do to win the game. Okay. Ben Simmons is not like that. Okay. So if Giannis plays the way that he does, yeah, it works because he's going to get after it. He's going to get after it on defense. He's going to make the right passes. He'll attack the basket. He can just get through people basically because he's got his athleticism and his size. Okay, Ben Simmons isn't going to do that. Like what, So that doesn't. And the other thing is that I just want to point out that I think people just weren't getting this. Okay. The idea of the Brooklyn Nets, okay, because first of all, when it was just Durant and Kyrie, I didn't think they were a championship contender because Kyrie's going to get hurt and then it's whatever. But when they got Harden, it's like, okay, if you have the three of them, throw out all the analytics, throw out the, culture and fit and whatever else. Okay. In the NBA, if you have that much talent and they play up to their level, you just overwhelm the other teams with talent. It may take you 6 or 7 games to win a series, but you'll most likely win if you have those three guys. Okay. So people are like, oh, well, we'll just move Harden for what? Okay. Now you got Simmons and you got other pieces. Guys, that doesn't work with the way this team is constructed. You're not going to be able to overwhelm people with your talent. So you're not a championship contender anymore. Besides the fact that people are like, oh, well, we'll get Kyrie to play in the road games. You're assuming he won't get hurt. He always gets hurt in the playoffs. So
Yeah, I think this idea that Brooklyn now, they really, help their team and they really, yes, they got value for the trade. There's no disputing that. Yes, they did get some value for the trade.
I understand the reason why they did the trade, but we also have to look at this with our eyes open and go, how do we actually think this is going to play out on the court, especially in the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't see this working, in any form or fashion. And I agree with you. There's no way to me. I mean, they weren't going to win the championship anyway, the way it was going, but I think they sealed it now. They're not winning the title now. And if Durant takes 2 or 3 weeks to come back, they might not make the playoffs.
If they're losing, they might miss the playoffs. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So all these people are like, I want to see him play in the playoffs. Okay, I don't know if that's going to happen because they might not make it.
Right. So let's spin this the other way. So your best case. So what you're trying to tell me is if you're telling me to believe in Brooklyn, right? They're going to fall down into the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 range as far as seeding goes. Okay. They might have to play in the play-in. So that means they're going to have to play 3 tough series. They're not going to get the first series where it's against some lesser than team that they can just sweep easily. They're going to have to play the best teams in the conference right away when Kyrie Irving can't play half the games. And you want me to tell you that, they're better now because they got Simmons.
Yeah.
I just don't, I don't buy into that at all. Now, I will give you the caveat here. Okay. If New York lifts the restrictions and Kyrie's playing every game now, okay, that changes it a little bit. I still don't think they're winning the championship, no matter what happens.
Well, remember, I was like last year, I started to think Brooklyn could win it all when they got Harden, because then I'm like, because Harden didn't really have an injury history up until the last couple of years. So I was like, okay, if you have him and Durant and Kyrie, you get what you get because he usually gets hurt. I was like, okay, fine. But it's still like, even if Kyrie plays all the games, he's gotten hurt in the playoffs 5 or 6 times. I mean, so it's just like, and then also it's like, we're just going to play the best teams and just roll. It's like, you're going to have to beat the 1 seed like right away, like a 1 seed, like say the 1 seed is, Miami, or I don't know, if it was Cleveland, then it's like, okay, those guys don't really have a lot of experience, but that team kind of fits together. They've been playing together the whole year. They kind of know what the hell they're doing. Brooklyn's kind of trying to figure it out, and we don't know if Steve Nash is a good coach.
Well, and it's a lot of heavy lifting for 2 guys, right?
Yeah.
If you're gonna, right? So let's just look at some other models of this, right? The Lakers with LeBron and Anthony Davis, right? Those 2 guys are physically built different. They can do everything on the court. They can shoot, they can defend, they can guard the rim, they can run the plays, they can do everything on the court that you need them to do. When you've got, Kevin Durant, who's, he's a big guy, but he's not a big guy in terms of, I'm protecting the rim. He's pretty good for a guy, that's, pretty slight to be able to play defense like that. It's great. But Kyrie Irving is a small guard, doesn't really impact the game on defense. And if he's not scoring, he's pretty much useless.
Yeah.
So it makes it's a lot to put on those 2 guys. And last year we saw it with the 3 of them. They all broke down.
Yeah.
So that means, and in the games where Kyrie can't play, Durant's going to have to play 40, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
In these games because what do you have? Who's your number two?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have a guy you can just give the ball to and go, hey, get me a bucket. Because Ben Simmons isn't going to do that. Seth Curry doesn't play that way. That's not how they're built. So I think we need to step into reality on Ben Simmons a little bit. I've heard this argument the whole past year. Well, just, he'd be a perfect fit on Golden State or Portland. If he can play like, he can play like Draymond Green. He can be the guy who plays defense against the big guys, and then, he runs the plays on offense. First of all, that is highly insulting to Ben Simmons and Draymond Green, okay? We're not giving Draymond Green the credit he deserves for being the great defensive player that he is, not only in terms of guarding people one-on-one, but team-wise. He's guarding multiple people, switching off pick and rolls, doing all these things he does. And then on offense...
He's a Hall of Famer.
Right. And then on offense, he's making big decisions on pick and rolls. He's doing all this stuff. So,
and he's not a great shooter, but he will shoot.
Right. Yeah, he is a threat to score. So, yeah, it's like we're now asking way too much. It's like we see Ben Simmons as like this guy that we can make him whatever we want. It's like he's in our imagination now to where we want to create this Magic Johnson type, guy who can just do all this stuff. But
dude, what are we, 5 years into his career?
Right. And it's not that Ben Simmons doesn't have a lot of talent and isn't a good player. He is. This isn't a indictment of Ben Simmons' career, but he can't be your third best player when you're trying to win the championship, or your second best player. That's not how he's built. He's a good role player. Like I think Ben Simmons could be really successful in the NBA if he's on the right team.
Yeah.
But the problem is he's paid like he's a max player, but he's not a max player.
Yeah, no, he's not even close. Yeah.
So when you're in that kind of situation, it makes it difficult on the rest of your roster. And it would be one thing if, he's just kind of lazy, doesn't work on his game as much as he should. But if he's properly motivated, he will. No, he flat out refuses to work on his game. So why do people keep telling me he's going to be this big guy who can do all this stuff, and they're going to have him play center? And like, okay, you can tell me that. So like I told you on the phone earlier, we've got to stop telling me what you think Ben Simmons can do and start telling me what he will do.
Yeah.
Because we know, he's really talented. He's really capable of all these things, but he's never shown that he's going to do that. And we've seen him in the playoffs, and we've seen what happens.
Well, and just like, and I'm not saying when you're 5 years into your career, there's obviously still room to grow, but you reach a point where you have to kind of start saying, this is kind of what this guy is. And just to give you an example, like LeBron 5 years into his career wasn't a great shooter, but he became a great shooter, 5 or 6 years later after working on it all the time. Until finally the 2013 finals, he's hitting threes and he's hitting jump shots. Okay.
And listen, here's the thing. Maybe 4 or 5 years from now, Ben Simmons will be able to do more stuff and he'll have a more complete game and all that stuff. Brooklyn doesn't have that kind of time. They're trying to win the title now. So we can't wait around for you to figure out what the hell you're doing. And here's the thing, like Brooklyn, obviously, as we've seen, coddles all their players, right? They're like, you do whatever you want. Well, how has that situation worked out for Ben Simmons?
Yeah.
You're just gonna, all right, you do whatever you do, and you're just gonna allow that to. So I think I understand what Brooklyn did because they got assets that they can now trade for stuff later.
Right. So let's talk about this from Philadelphia, and then I want to come back to Brooklyn, and then just talk about why this. Because we don't think they're going to win the championship now. Why we think this didn't work? Why their super team thing didn't work? So we'll get into that. But let's get into
all right. So look, Philadelphia. I think it's a completely different outlook. Number one, you were getting nothing from Ben Simmons before. He was useless, not playing, and you get a guy who, when he's engaged, is one of the best players in the NBA.
Yeah.
and it's not up for debate. The guy is a fantastic offensive player, and we saw what he did when he first got to Brooklyn last season. He became the point guard. He was a playmaker. He was amazing. He was in the MVP conversation for a little while last year. So,
Right.
I think this just comes down. Now, listen, again, I didn't like this trade because I still don't. I feel better about what I'm getting from James Harden, but I still don't know.
Yeah. Well, second of all, remember, Harden's been basically out of shape the last 2 years. Okay. He hasn't really been. I mean, there's been times he's been engaged. There's been times he hasn't been. And also, it's just Harden tends to burn out in the playoffs. And I think maybe that's a conditioning issue. Maybe he's just not in the right kind of shape that he needs to be, or as good a shape as he could be in. And so you're telling me that he's got a history of doing that. He's now 32. Okay. LeBron, is in unbelievable shape. And then by the time he hit, 36 or whatever, he's been breaking down. He's been getting injured a lot more. Okay. But he was basically he was avoiding that because of the kind of condition he was in. So you're telling me Harden's already kind of starting to break down because he's been out of shape? So I kind of feel like there's maybe, I don't want to say there's a cliff coming, but, that in addition to the rule changes, how he's had to adjust to that, not being able to get all those foul calls, which he was so good at for most of his career, so there are some legitimate concerns, although I will say in Daryl Morey's defense, his thing is stars win championships, and that's true. In the NBA, the stars win the championships. So if you get, I mean, I guess you have to say you have to get like the top level James Harden play, plus the way Joel Embiid is playing. Okay, you got a legitimate shot to win the championship, or at least get to the finals. But there are still, there's still questions about Harden. I still, I'm a little concerned of people like, oh, well, when he's engaged, okay, well, when is that going to be? Like it's a question,
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not thrilled with James Harden. I don't really like watching him play, but I'm not going to be stupid and sit here and tell you he's not any good. The guy is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to. That's the thing. I don't want to jump to that extreme. I have some concerns, but I mean, if he plays like he's capable of playing, and him and Embiid, like that could be tough to beat in the Eastern Conference. So
Yeah. I think and like the opposite of Brooklyn. Like Brooklyn, I'm worried about right now. Yeah. In Philly, I'm less worried about right now. I'm more worried that you now got this guy in. He's 32 years old, and you're going to give him a 4 or 5 year contract.
Yeah,
that concerns me way more than they may have the chance to win the title this season and next season. So that's one of the reasons why I don't know that I would have done it. But again, when you got Ben Simmons and he's not going to play for you,
you got to do something. And right. Look, like I said, the NBA sometimes we can overcomplicate it. Like you can usually simplify it. The stars win the championships. That's usually the way it goes. Right. And so you don't want to like Embiid is having an MVP type year. You don't know how much longer he's going to stay healthy. So you got to kind of go for it right now. This was the best thing that was out there. So you go for it.
I think there's a significantly better chance that Harden and Embiid can get this to work than anything I believe from Brooklyn. So absolutely. I think Philly made a good deal. People making a big deal about them giving up Seth Curry and 2 first-round picks need to move on because that's nonsense. Like
picks are not useless, but it depends what you're trying to do. For them right now, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they got the better end of the deal. I think like anybody arguing anything else, I just don't get it. Like Philly got the best player, and when he's
I don't know if you saw this, but you can always count on Skip Bayless if you ever need a really bad take. He always delivers. I mean, it's just he delivers in clutch time. He's got that clutch gene. But he says that the Nets clearly won this trade. It was like a 50-point blowout. But Shannon Sharp is just like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, oh my God.
Yeah, listen, these are
get out of James Harden, and I'm just thinking, well, what the fuck am I going to get out of Ben Simmons? Like, what the fuck?
These are misfit toys, and we're trying to choose the best out of a bad bunch, But I think, but I like where Philly's at. I like where they had to do something because they've got Joel Embiid's not going to be around forever, and they've got to try to they got to swing for the fences, and you got to give Daryl Morey credit. We all thought he was delusional, for a year, and he made a good move. But just a side note here, so James Harden, the guy who's flamed out in the playoffs, more often than just about anybody, is now being coached by Doc Rivers. The coach has blown more 3-1 leads than anybody else ever. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah, if they do well, man, those Philadelphia fans will absolutely love it. So all right, so you wanted to go back.